a single mother, a 15-year-old daughter, and one rainy night in New York City that changes everything. When Tessa disappears after a tutoring session, Elena tears through the city in a panic until she finds her daughter sprinting through a dark park, a man closing in behind her. Then a stranger steps out of the shadows and ends it in seconds. No badge, no explanation, just dangerous eyes and a card with a single phone number. That stranger is Luca Belladonna, and neither Elena nor Tessa understands yet what finding him is going to cost them. If this story pulls you in, hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this reaches. Us. The rent was 4 days late, and the radiator had been making that sound again, the low metallic groan that meant it was about to quit entirely. And Elena Voss was sitting at the kitchen table at 11:40 at night, with 3 dictionaries open and a half-eaten bowl of instant noodles gone cold beside her laptop, translating a 70-page pharmaceutical contract from German into English for a client who needed it by 6 in the morning and was paying her $800 she absolutely could not afford to lose. Her eyes burned. She'd been at it since 7. The apartment was a 1-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building on the outer edge of Morningside Heights that smelled like mildew and other people's cooking and had a crack running diagonally across the living room ceiling that the landlord, Mr. Ferris, had been promising to fix for the better part of 2 years. Elena had learned to stop looking at it. There were things in this life you stopped looking at because looking at them cost energy you didn't have. She reached for her coffee. It was cold, too. She drank it anyway. Tessa was supposed to be home by 9:30. She had a standing Tuesday arrangement, calculus tutoring with Mr. Graft, a retired math teacher who lived 6 blocks away and charged $40 an hour and actually got through to her daughter in a way that Elena, with all her languages, could not. Numbers had never been Elena's strength. Words were. Numbers were Tessa's battlefield, and Mr. Graft was the man who helped her fight. 9:30 became 10. Elena told herself traffic. She told herself Tessa lost track of time. She told herself the usual things mothers tell themselves in the minutes before fear becomes something physical. 10 became 10:30. She tried Tessa's phone. 4 times, straight to voicemail each time. That breezy recorded voice of her daughter saying, "Leave a message, I'll get back to you," in a tone that suggested she never actually would. Elena pushed back from the table. She stood at the window and looked down at the street. Rain had started sometime in the last hour. The kind of November rain that wasn't quite sleet but wanted to be, cold and insistent and mean. The streetlights made the wet pavement glow orange. A cab moved through the intersection below. A man in a hooded jacket walked fast with his head down. No Tessa. She called Mr. Graft. It rang 7 times before he picked up, his voice foggy with sleep. He told her Tessa had left at 8:45, right on schedule. He'd watched her go down the front steps himself. Elena was pulling on her coat before he finished the sentence. She didn't think about the contract. She didn't think about the 6 a.m. deadline or the $800 or the radiator that was probably going to die before morning. She grabbed her keys and her phone, and she went down the 4 flights of stairs at something close to a run, her hand sliding along the metal railing, and she pushed out through the building's front door into the cold rain and the orange-lit dark, and she started moving. 6 blocks. She knew every inch of the route Tessa would have taken. She walked it herself twice a week, knew which corner had the broken streetlight, knew which stretch of pavement buckled up near the tree roots, knew the shortcut through the edge of St. Nicholas Park that Tessa sometimes took when she wanted to shave 3 minutes off the walk home. She tried the phone again. Voicemail. "Tessa, call me back right now. I'm not angry. I just need to know you're okay. Call me back." She hung up and kept walking. The rain was getting harder. By the time she reached the first intersection, her jacket was soaked through at the shoulders, and her sneakers were wet, and she was breathing in that shallow, controlled way she'd learned after Marcus left. After Tessa's father, Brandon, had walked out the door with a duffel bag and a mouthful of excuses and left her alone with a 7-year-old and a checking account that had $412 in it. She'd learned to breathe like that, controlled. Because if you breathed too deep, you felt everything, and feeling everything took you apart, and she couldn't afford to come apart. Not then. Not now. She turned onto the block before the park, and she heard it. Running footsteps. Hard and desperate and wrong. Not the easy rhythm of someone jogging, but the ragged, stumbling sprint of someone running from something. Elena stopped. A figure burst out from between two parked cars 30 feet ahead of her. Tessa. Her daughter's face was white. Her backpack was gone. She was running in that headlong, arms-out way that meant pure terror, not thought, not direction, just escape. Her sneakers slapped the wet pavement, and her breath came out in visible clouds in the cold air, and her eyes were wide and fixed on something behind her. Behind her, coming through the gap between the cars, was a man. He wasn't running. He was walking fast, which was somehow worse. A big man, broad through the shoulders, in a dark jacket with the hood up. He moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who knew he didn't need to run. He had already decided how this ended. Elena opened her mouth. Tessa saw her. Tessa screamed. Not words, just sound, raw and animal. The man kept walking. Elena lunged forward and grabbed Tessa's arm as her daughter reached her, and for one fractured second they were tangled together, Tessa's hands clutching at her mother's jacket. Elena trying to put herself between her daughter and the man still coming toward them through the rain. She reached for her phone. 911. 3 numbers. Her fingers were shaking, and then something moved in the dark of the park entrance to her left. Not a sound. Not at first. Just a shift in the shadows, the way darkness can organize itself into a shape before you can make sense of what you're seeing. Elena registered it the way you register something wrong before your brain has named it. A spike in the blood, a cold certainty at the base of the skull. A man stepped out of the dark. He was tall. That was the first thing. Tall in the way that certain men are. Not physically imposing so much as architecturally present, built in a way that reorganizes the space around them. He wore a dark coat, collar up against the rain, and he moved without any hurry at all, stepping into the orange light of the street lamp, with the casual confidence of a man who owned every room he walked into, including ones with no ceiling. He looked at the man in the hood, just looked at him. Something passed between them that Elena couldn't name and didn't need to. The hooded man stopped walking. He stood in the rain and he looked at this stranger who had appeared from nowhere, and for a moment everything was frozen. The rain coming down, Tessa's ragged breathing against her mother's neck, the street lamp throwing its orange light across the wet street. Then the hooded man said something, low and threatening. Elena couldn't make out the words. The stranger didn't respond. He moved. Elena would think about those next 8 seconds for a long time afterward. She would turn them over in her mind the way you turn over something you found and can't identify, examining them from different angles, trying to understand what she actually saw. It was fast. That was the truthful part. Faster than she could follow cleanly. A controlled sequence of movement that ended with the hooded man on the ground on his hands and knees, and the stranger standing over him, not even breathing hard. He said something to the man on the ground. Very quiet. Elena couldn't hear it over the rain. The hooded man got up. He kept his eyes down. He walked away down the street without looking back, and then he turned a corner and was gone. And the street was empty again except for Elena and Tessa and this stranger in the dark coat standing in the rain. He looked at them. Elena's heart was slamming. Tessa had her face pressed into her mother's shoulder and was making a sound that wasn't quite crying, a high, sustained note of shock. Elena held her daughter with one arm and kept her eyes on the stranger, because she was not naive enough to think that being rescued by someone unknown was the same as being safe. He didn't come toward them. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat, and he took out a card. White. Simple. He held it out. Elena didn't move. He set it on top of a nearby car, stepped back, met her eyes for one long moment in which Elena had the very specific and unnerving sensation that he was seeing her more completely than most people managed in months of acquaintance. Then he turned and walked back into the dark of the park entrance, and the shadows took him as cleanly as water closes over a stone. Elena stood there in the rain with her daughter trembling against her. After a moment, she reached out and picked up the card. White stock. A phone number. 10 digits. Nothing else. No name. No title. No word of explanation. She stood there in the rain reading it for a long time, Tessa's breathing slowing gradually against her shoulder, and she thought, who carries a card with nothing on it but a number? She didn't throw it away. She put it in her jacket pocket, and she walked her daughter home. Tessa talked in fragments on the walk back. The man had followed her from Mr. Graft's block. She hadn't noticed at first. Then she had noticed, and she'd walked faster, and he'd walked faster, and when she'd turned into the park to cut through, because it was faster, because she always cut through, he'd grabbed her backpack and she'd twisted free of it and run. And she'd been running for almost 2 blocks before Elena found her. Elena listened. She said the right things. She held Tessa's hand and she said, "You're safe, and I've got you, and it's over now." And all of it was true, and none of it reached the cold place that had opened up in her chest. She knew what could have happened. She understood, with the full and merciless clarity that comes from having survived hard things, exactly what the night could have become. They got back to the apartment. Elena locked the door and put the chain on and stood in the kitchen while Tessa showered, listening to the water run. The pharmaceutical contract was still open on her laptop. The cold noodles were still on the table. The radiator made its sound. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out the card again. She set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. Then she went back to work. She had a deadline, and the work didn't care about anything else. She didn't sleep. At 5:58 in the morning, she sent the contract. At 6:15, Tessa came out of the bedroom in pajamas, hair sleep-tangled, and asked if Elena was okay. Elena said yes. Tessa looked at her the way 15-year-olds look at their mothers when they know the answer is wrong but don't have the tools yet to push it. Then she made herself cereal and sat at the table and didn't say anything, and Elena loved her for it. The card sat on the table between them. Tessa looked at it. "Who gave you that?" "The man who helped us." "You kept it?" "Yes." Tessa was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you going to call it?" "No," Elena said. She believed that when she said it. She believed it for 4 days. On the 5th day, the neighborhood changed. It started with sounds. 2 nights after the park, Elena woke at 2 in the morning to what she thought at first was a car backfiring. Then another. Then shouting in the street below. She stood at the window in the dark and watched 2 men run through the intersection below, and a 3rd man follow them. And none of it made sense in the clean, purposeful way that things need to make sense before you can dismiss them as someone else's problem. She heard sirens. Blue and red lights strobed up the front of the building. She checked on Tessa, asleep. She went back to bed and lay there with her eyes open until morning. The next day, Mrs. Park from the 2nd floor told her in the elevator that there'd been a shooting 2 blocks over. "Gang-related," Mrs. Park said, in the knowing tone of someone who watched a great deal of local news. "It was spreading," Mrs. Park said. She'd heard it from her nephew who knew someone in the precinct. The whole corridor between Amsterdam and Broadway was getting bad, had been building for months. Elena nodded and said she'd be careful. That night she made Tessa come straight home after school. No detours, no tutoring until she said so. Tessa argued. Elena used the voice that didn't invite argument back. 3 days later, on a gray Thursday afternoon when Elena was at her desk working through a French legal deposition, she heard the shot. It wasn't distant this time. It wasn't something she could reason into being a car or a pipe or anything benign. It was close and flat and final. And before she'd processed it consciously, she was already moving, out of her chair, through the short hallway, pushing open the bathroom door. Tessa was on the floor beside the tub, hands over her ears. A perfect hole punched through the frosted window above her, glass glittering across the tile floor. Elena crossed the room in 2 steps and got her hands on her daughter. No blood. She checked everywhere, fast and systematic, the way terror focuses the mind into something almost surgical. No blood. Tessa was shaking, not crying, just shaking, with her eyes fixed on a point about 3 inches in front of her face. "I'm here," Elena said. "You're okay. You're okay." "Mom," Tessa said, just that, just the word. The bullet had passed through the window and buried itself in the opposite wall. Elena looked at it. Just a dark mark in the plaster, a small and absurd ending point for something that could have been everything. She looked at where Tessa had been standing, 18 inches to the right, maybe less. She sat on the bathroom floor with her daughter and she held her, and her mind was moving very fast and very cold, running through everything she had and didn't have, and what she knew and didn't know, and what her options were. Her options were not good. She couldn't move. She had no savings worth naming. She'd bled them dry when her translation agency had cut her hours 18 months ago, and she'd been freelancing since, building it back up dollar by dollar. She had no family in New York. Her mother was in Cleveland in a 2-bedroom condo with a spare room that still had Elena's high school track trophies in it, and she would take them in without question, But Elena also knew what returning to that house would mean, what it would cost her in every dimension that wasn't financial. She had spent 12 years building herself into someone who did not need rescue. Going back to Cleveland was not a direction she could move. She had no plan. She had a phone number on a white card. She put Tessa to bed at 9. Then she sat at the kitchen table and she picked up the card and she picked up her phone and she held both of them for a long time, the way you hold things when you're making a decision that you already know you've made. She dialed. It rang twice. Yes. A man's voice, low, not a greeting exactly, more like an acknowledgement, the voice of someone who had been expecting a call and was simply confirming its arrival. Elena said, "You gave me your card 6 days ago, in the rain, near St. Nicholas Park." A beat. Then, "I remember." She said, "My daughter almost got shot in our bathroom this afternoon." Silence. Not the silence of surprise, but of consideration. "Are you both unharmed?" "Yes. The bullet went through the window. She was—" Elena's voice did something she hadn't authorized. She stopped and steadied it. She was close. "Your address." I'm not asking you to trust me," the man said. His voice was even. "I'm asking for your address so I can assess the situation. You can have this conversation or you can hang up. Either way, I'll know your building before morning, but it will be faster if you tell me." Elena looked at the bullet hole in the hallway wall, visible from where she sat. She told him the address. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. "Don't open the door for anyone else." He was there in 14. She looked through the peephole before she opened it. He stood in the hallway in a charcoal suit and a dark coat, no tie, his hands in his coat pockets. His face in the hallway's yellow light was angular and composed. Mid-30s, she thought, dark hair, dark eyes, the kind of face that had been built for a certain kind of authority and had grown into it fully. He didn't look like a man who had hurried. He looked like a man who moved at exactly the pace he chose. She opened the door. He looked at her, then past her, scanning the apartment with a professional efficiency that would have alarmed her if she hadn't already been alarmed. "The bullet," he said. She pointed. He walked to the hallway wall and looked at the mark in the plaster for a moment. Then he went to the bathroom. She followed. He stood in the doorway and looked at the window, the glass still on the tile floor because she hadn't wanted Tessa to come back in before it was cleaned up. He looked at the angle. He looked at the street below through the hole. 2 blocks east, he said, more to himself than to her. Then he came back into the hallway, and he looked at her directly and said, "My name is Luca Belladonna. I owe you an introduction, and I apologize that it took this to prompt it." "What were you doing in that park?" Elena said. 6 days ago. "Taking a shortcut," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He looked at the apartment, her laptop, the dictionaries, the stacks of folders with her freelance work, the kitchen with its outdated appliances and the window with the crack in the corner. "You translate." "German, French, Italian, some Spanish." She paused. "I know what you are." He met her eyes. "Do you?" "I don't know specifically, but I know what kind of man carries a card with only a phone number. What kind of man does what you did in that park and doesn't sweat afterward? And you called me anyway. I have a 15-year-old daughter who was 18 inches from a bullet today." Something moved across his face. Not softness, exactly. Something more complicated and older than that. "I have a legitimate business," he said. "Several. One of them is an import company. High-end goods, European sourcing. I need someone who speaks German and Italian and French. Someone I can trust to handle sensitive communications without making errors." He paused. "I'll pay you 3 times what you're making now. I'll move you and your daughter into a secure building. She'll have a school to go to where no one will bother her." Elena looked at him. "And what do you need from me in return?" "Accurate translation, discretion. Nothing else." "Nothing else." "Ms. Voss," his voice was flat and certain, "if I wanted something else from you, this would be a very different conversation." She believed him. That was the disturbing part. She stood in her hallway with bullet hole plaster dust on the floor, and she believed him, and she understood that this belief was not entirely rational and didn't fully care. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course." He left. No pressure, no parting threat or sweetener. He just said goodnight and walked back out into the hallway and was gone. Elena locked the door and stood with her back against it and looked at her apartment. 3 times what she was making. Secure building. A school where Tessa wouldn't have to duck below window level in bathrooms. She thought about it for 2 days. She said yes. The transition happened with a speed that was mildly disorienting. Luca sent people, 2 men, professional and quiet, who appeared at her door on Saturday morning with flat-pack boxes and wrapped her life efficiently and without comment. A car. A building on the Upper East Side with a doorman and a service elevator and windows that didn't rattle. A 2-bedroom apartment on the 9th floor where every appliance worked and the ceilings were high, and the heat came on without groaning. Tessa walked through it and didn't say anything for a full minute. Then she said, "Is this real?" "For now," Elena said, because she didn't know how else to answer. Tessa started at a new school the following Monday. She came home that afternoon with a look on her face that Elena hadn't seen in a long time. Not happy exactly, but something closer to neutral, something closer to okay, like someone who had spent months bracing for impact and had been allowed, briefly, to unclench. Elena reported to Luca's office on Tuesday. It was in a building in Midtown, a real building, unremarkable glass and steel on the exterior, the kind that housed 50 different businesses. The import company was called Meridian International Trade, and it occupied the 14th floor, and it looked exactly like what it claimed to be. A mid-sized import business with actual staff and actual operations and an actual paper trail. Elena spent the first week going through files, and she found nothing she could point to as categorically wrong. The communications she translated were about shipping logistics and customs documentation and supplier contracts in Frankfurt and Milan and Lyon. She translated. She was good at it. She was very good at it, and after years of piecemeal freelance work, it was almost unsettling to be somewhere that recognized it. Luca was in the office most mornings. He ran things with a quiet authority that was nothing like what Elena had expected. Not loud, not performative, not the kind of control that announces itself. He spoke to people and they moved. That was the whole of it. He didn't need volume. He spoke to Elena as he spoke to everyone else on his staff, directly, efficiently, without condescension. He asked her opinion on translation choices, and he listened to her answers. He didn't look at her the way men in positions of power sometimes looked at women who worked for them. The assessing look, the calibrating look, the look that is also a kind of claim. He didn't do any of that. She noticed when he didn't do it. Weeks passed. The city turned colder. November slid into December, and the first real cold came, the kind that came off the Hudson and found every gap in your coat, and Elena learned the building's rhythms, when the good elevator was fastest, which coffee place in the lobby actually got the order right, when to take the stairs. Small calibrations that meant you knew where you were. She and Luca developed something she could only call a working understanding, a shorthand that grew without either of them deliberately constructing it. He would come to her desk with documents, and they would work through terminology, and she would push back when his phrasing changed the meaning, and he would listen and revise. He trusted her judgment. She found that she trusted his. She didn't ask about the other part of what he did. She had made a calculation. She would do her job, and she would not look at what she wasn't supposed to look at, because her daughter was warm and safe and going to a school where she was learning to breathe again, and that was the deal she had made, and she intended to honor it. But she watched him. She couldn't help that. She watched the way he moved through a room, the way he held himself, still when he wasn't moving, precisely directed when he was, never wasted. She watched the way he listened when someone spoke to him, full attention, not the performance of attention, but the actual article. She watched him at the end of a long day take off his jacket and sit at his desk with his sleeves rolled up and go through papers with the focused patience of someone for whom work was not a punishment, but a form of control over a world that was otherwise not controllable. She recognized that. She had built her own life the same way. One Thursday afternoon in the second week of December, she was working late, the floor mostly empty, and she realized she'd made an error 3 pages back in a long German contract. Not a significant error, but a technical one, an ambiguity in the tense of a warranty clause that would matter to a careful reader. She went back through it and fixed it, and then she just sat for a moment, her eyes tired and her neck stiff. She heard footsteps in the hall. Luca appeared in the doorway of her office. "I thought you'd gone," he said. error to fix. She gestured at the screen. He came in, not fully, not across the threshold, just leaning against the doorframe the way people do when they're not intending to stay. He looked at the papers on her desk and then at her. "How is Tessa?" he asked. It was the first time he'd asked about Tessa directly since the night at the apartment. She looked at him. "Better?" she said. "She's actually better. She's sleeping through the night again. She's talking about going to MIT." Something that might have been satisfaction crossed his face. She should go to MIT. She's 15. Good time to start believing it's possible. Elena looked at him. There was something in his voice when he said it, a flatness underneath it, like a note struck against something hollow. She had a sudden, certain, completely unfounded sense that he was speaking from the specific interior of a life in which someone had believed something was possible too late. She didn't ask. It wasn't her territory. "Go home," he said. "The contract will wait." She was about to agree when her phone rang. She looked at the screen, a number she didn't recognize, a New York area code. She almost didn't pick up. She picked up. "Elena Voss?" A man's voice, rougher than Luca's, familiar in a way that reached into her chest and closed around something cold. She knew before he said his name. "It's Brandon," the voice said. "I know you moved. I've been looking for you for 2 weeks. I need to talk to you about Tessa." Elena stood very still. Across the room, Luca watched her face change. He saw whatever it did in those 3 seconds. The stillness, the way the color shifted, the controlled, deliberate breath she took. And he straightened slowly from the doorframe, and his eyes went very focused and very still. "Brandon?" Elena said. Her voice was level. She was proud of that. "You've been gone for 8 years. "I know," he said, "but I'm in New York, and I think we should talk." Her hand was steady on the phone. Her chest was not. 8 years. Tessa had been 7 when he left. 7 years old, standing at the window asking when her father was coming back, and Elena had said soon because she didn't have another answer, and the soon had stretched into weeks and months and years, and Tessa had eventually stopped asking. She had never stopped paying for it. "This isn't a good time," Elena said. "It's never a good time with you." His voice had that old edge to it, the edge that showed up when he'd been drinking, which had been often enough at the end that Elena had started hiding the car keys before bed. "Where are you?" she said. He gave her a bar in Midtown, 3 blocks from the Meridian building. She stood there with the phone in her hand after he hung up, and she looked at nothing in particular for a moment. "Who was that?" Luca said. She looked at him. "My ex-husband," she said. "Tessa's father. He's apparently back in New York." Luca didn't say anything immediately. He looked at her with that full, unperformative attention he gave things that required it. "Do you want company?" he said. She almost said no. She had been saying no to help for so long it had become reflexive, a survival mechanism that had outlasted the conditions that created it. She had been alone and sufficient and self-contained for 8 years, and she was very good at it. "Yes," she said, because the honest answer mattered more right now than the armored one. They went together. The bar was dark and smelled like old wood and spilled beer and the particular defeated atmosphere of a place where people come to avoid going home. Brandon was at a table near the back. Elena saw him from across the room and felt nothing she had expected to feel. She had expected anger or grief or even a kind of relief. What she felt instead was a quiet, cold recognition. The recognition you have when you see something that used to matter and understand that it doesn't anymore. Not because you've healed, but because you've survived, which is not the same thing, but sometimes has to serve. He looked bad. Older than 8 years should have made him, with the specific deterioration of someone who had been fighting something and losing. He had a glass in front of him that wasn't his first. He looked at Elena, then his eyes moved to Luca, and something shifted in his face. "You brought someone," Brandon said. "I did," Elena said. She sat down. Luca remained standing, slightly back, not at the table. Present. That was all. Brandon pulled his eyes back to Elena. "You look good," he said. "The new place treating you well?" "What do you want, Brandon?" He turned the glass in his hands. "I want to see my daughter." "You have her number." "She doesn't pick up when I call." "She knows your number." He flinched. Good. Elena had not meant it as a weapon, but she did not regret that it landed like one. I'm in a bad place, he said, financially. I got into some things and they didn't work out and I need... Stop, Elena said. He stopped. You have not called your daughter in 8 years, Elena said. Her voice was steady and quiet, and she was very careful with every word. You have missed every birthday, every school event, every hard thing she has been through, and there have been hard things. There have been things that would have broken a lesser kid, and she got through them without you. And now you're in a bad place financially, and you want to see her. Brandon's jaw tightened. She's my daughter. She is, Elena said. She's your daughter, and she is doing well, and I am not going to let you walk back into her life to use her as emotional leverage to get money from me. That's what this is. We both know that. So ask me what you actually came here to ask. Silence. He asked. The number he named made Elena's chest go tight. Not because she had it, she didn't, but because she understood immediately what he thought she had. He had found out about the apartment somehow. He had looked at her address and thought, she has money now. She found a man with money. And he had come to collect. I don't have that kind of money, Elena said. But he does. Brandon looked at Luca, not with fear, with the particular contempt of someone who was afraid and was covering it badly. Luca looked back at him. He had not moved or spoken once. He simply stood there, and the quality of his stillness was becoming, Elena realized, progressively less neutral. It was the stillness of something controlled but not settled. It was the stillness of a man deciding. This doesn't concern you, Brandon said to him. Luca said nothing. You can go, Brandon said. Luca looked at Elena. His eyes asked a question. Elena gave the smallest nod. What happened in the next 60 seconds was quiet. No raised voices, no visible violence. Luca leaned down, said something in Brandon's ear, very brief and very low, and Elena watched the color leave her ex-husband's face in a way that was almost clinical, the specific pallor of someone who has just understood something fully and permanently. Brandon picked up his glass. Set it down. He did not look at Elena again. He left. Elena sat at the table and listened to the bar sounds and looked at her own hands. Luca came back to the table and sat across from her, and she looked at him. What did you say to him? She asked. Nothing he didn't already know, Luca said. She looked at him for a long moment, at the dark eyes that had watched her ex-husband fold and leave, at the face that gave nothing away that it didn't choose to give. She was aware in that moment of something that she had been carefully not acknowledging for several weeks, a current under the professional surface of things, something that moved whether she looked at it or not. I should get back, she said. Yes, he said. They left together, and they didn't talk much on the walk back to where his car was waiting, and the cold came off the river and the city made its sounds around them, and Elena thought, I don't know what this is becoming. She thought, whatever it is, I'm already in it. 3 weeks later, Brandon Voss called again. Different number, different bar, same voice, same slurring undertow, but sharper now, harder, the way desperation gets when it's been refused once and is coming back with its edges out. He wanted more. He had, he said, been talking to a lawyer. He had, he said, certain rights. He said Tessa's name in a way that made Elena's hands go cold, the specific coldness of a threat dressed as concern. She didn't call Luca. She sat with it for 20 minutes, turning it over, testing herself against it. Then she called him. He arrived the next morning. He sat across from her at the kitchen table in the new apartment while Tessa was at school, and he listened without interrupting while she laid it out. What Brandon had said, what he was threatening, what she believed he was capable of. When she finished, Luca was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Is there anything else? Elena looked at him. What do you mean? Anything else you want to tell me, he said, about why this frightens you? Not the logistics, the actual reason. She looked at her hands. She had not expected that question. She had not expected him to go straight to the thing underneath the thing. He was never violent, she said. Not physically, but he was... She stopped. He could make you feel like nothing, like you'd misread everything about your own life, like whatever you'd built was less than you thought it was. He was very good at that. And Tessa was 7 when she last saw him, and she's 15 now, and she's just starting to believe that she's worth something, and if he comes back and does what he does, he won't, Luca said. The simplicity of it hit her in a way she hadn't expected. You can't just, she started. Elena. His voice was quiet and absolute. He won't. She looked at him for a long time. She looked at the man who had stepped out of shadows to protect her daughter before he knew either of their names. She looked at the man who had moved her into warmth and safety and asked for nothing in return that she hadn't been able to give. She looked at the controlled, complicated, impenetrable face of someone who had built walls as high as hers and lived behind them just as long. She thought, I don't know who you really are. She thought, I know exactly who you are. Okay, she said, quietly, like a decision. He nodded. He stood to go. At the door he paused, his hand on the frame, and he looked back at her with something in his expression that he hadn't let her see before. Something underneath the composure. Something that looked, briefly, startlingly, like need. Then it was gone. Lock the door, he said. She did. She stood in the kitchen afterward and listened to the quiet of the apartment. The good, solid quiet of a building where the walls were thick and the heat worked and no one could reach them. And she thought about how she had arrived at this point, the chain of chances and accidents, the late contract, the missing daughter, the rain, the park, the man in the shadows. Her phone buzzed. Tessa. Home at 4. Can I invite Yolanda for dinner? Elena typed, Yes, I'll make pasta. She put the phone down. She looked at the kitchen. At the good stove, the real counter space, the window that showed sky and not a wall. Then her phone rang again. Unknown number. She almost didn't pick up. The number was different from Brandon's usual burners, and something in the timing felt wrong. Too soon, too close to Luca's visit, too coincidental. She picked up. The voice on the other end was not Brandon. It was a woman, calm and professional and cold. Ms. Voss, the woman said, my name is not important right now. What is important is that you understand you are in a very dangerous position. The man you are working for, the man you are becoming involved with, has enemies, and those enemies have noticed you. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. I'd advise you, the woman said, to think very carefully about your next steps, for your sake, and for Tessa's. The line went dead. Elena stood in the kitchen of the safe apartment in the secure building, and the silence around her felt entirely different than it had 30 seconds ago. She thought, I need to tell him. She thought, and if I tell him, everything changes. She stood there with the dead phone in her hand, and she understood, with the clean, cold clarity of someone who has been surviving long enough to recognize a turning point when it arrives, that the door she had been edging toward had just opened, and that whatever was on the other side of it was not what she had thought. Elena didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with the phone face down in front of her, and she thought about the woman's voice, the flatness of it, the professional calm of someone delivering a message they'd delivered before. Not a threat made in anger, a threat made in administration. That was worse. Angry people made mistakes. Calm people had plans. She thought about telling Luca. She thought about not telling him. She thought about Tessa asleep in the next room, and Yolanda who'd come for dinner and laughed too loud at something on Tessa's phone, and the easy normalcy of two teenage girls eating pasta in a warm kitchen, and how that normalcy was the most fragile thing she had ever been responsible for protecting. At 2 in the morning, she got up and poured herself a glass of water and stood at the window looking at the city below. All those lit windows, all those other lives running their parallel tracks, and she made herself be honest about what she knew. She knew the call was real. She knew it because it was too precise to be a bluff. The timing, the name, the reference to Tessa. Someone had been watching. Someone had been close enough and patient enough to watch and wait and choose their moment. And that kind of patience didn't come from amateurs. She knew she was going to tell Luca. She'd known that since she hung up. The question wasn't whether. The question was what it meant, what it cost, to bring him a problem and let him solve it. Every time she did that, the ledger between them shifted. Every time she called and he came, the dynamic recalibrated. She was not naive about what dependency felt like from the inside, or how quietly it could install itself before you noticed the weight. She'd been dependent on Brandon once. She remembered how that ended. But Brandon had been weakness dressed as strength. She'd understood that only after the years of small erosions, the casual undermining, the way he made her doubt herself in the particular intimate way only people you love can manage. She'd confused his need to control with his need for her, and by the time she understood the difference, there was a 7-year-old asking when Daddy was coming home. Luca was not that. She knew he wasn't that. She did not know what he was instead. At 6:15, she heard Tessa's alarm go off. She heard her daughter move through the apartment in the particular sequence Elena knew by sound. Bathroom first, then the creak of the closet, then the kitchen, where she appeared in a gray hoodie with her hair pulled back and her backpack already on, eating a granola bar and looking at her phone. Tessa looked up, took in Elena's face, the untouched glass of water, the fact that Elena was dressed in yesterday's clothes. "Did you sleep?" Tessa said. "Some." Tessa looked at her for another moment with those sharp, patient eyes that had always seen too much. She was 15, but she had the watchfulness of someone older, earned the hard way. Then she said, "Is it the Brandon thing?" "Don't worry about Brandon." "Mom, go to school," Elena said. "Text me when you get there." Tessa held her gaze for 3 more seconds. Then she picked up her bag. At the door, she paused. "You know you can actually tell me things," she said. "I'm not 7 anymore." "I know," Elena said. Tessa left. Elena waited until she heard the elevator. Then she picked up her phone and called Luca. He answered on the second ring, and she told him about the call. All of it. The woman's voice, the exact words, the timing. When she finished, the silence on his end lasted 4 seconds. She counted. "Don't leave the building today," he said. "I have work. Work from the apartment. I'll send someone to stay in the lobby." "Luca," Elena. A pause. "Please." That word. Coming from him, it had a specific weight, like something he'd taken out of storage and wasn't entirely sure still fit. She said okay and hung up, and then she sat down at her laptop and opened her current file and stared at it without reading for a long time. He arrived at 10. He came with a man she hadn't seen before. Older, 50s, gray at the temples, the kind of build that suggested he'd spent his 20s doing something physical and his 30s learning not to need to. He introduced himself as Carver and said nothing else, and went to stand near the front door in a way that managed to be both unobtrusive and immovable. Luca sat across from Elena at the kitchen table. He'd brought coffee. Not the building lobby's coffee, but real coffee from the place on Lexington that knew what it was doing. He set a cup in front of her without asking. "Tell me again," he said. The voice, age, approximate, accent. 40s maybe, no strong accent. Midwest possibly, or just flat. TV newscaster flat. Exact words. She repeated them. He listened with his eyes slightly unfocused, not looking at her, looking inward, filing. "She knew Tessa's name," Elena said. "Yes." "How long have they been watching?" "I don't know yet." "That's not reassuring." "I know." He looked at her directly. "I'm not going to tell you this isn't serious. It is. There are people who would use leverage against me if they could find any. You and Tessa becoming visible was a risk I should have managed better." Elena looked at him. "Were we leverage when you hired me?" He met her eyes without flinching. "No." "I need you to be honest with me about that." "I am." She held his gaze for a long moment. He didn't look away, didn't shift, didn't do any of the small, evasive movements that people performed when they were managing truth rather than speaking it. "Okay," she said. "There's something else," he said. She waited. "Brandon," he set his coffee down. "He made contact with someone after I spoke to him that night. A man named Reeves. I need to know how much your ex-husband knows about your situation here." Elena felt a small cold shock move through her. "You've been watching Brandon?" "Monitoring," he said, as though the word made a difference. "Luca, you have a 15-year-old daughter and a man with a drinking problem and poor judgment making threats," he said. "What would you have done?" She wanted to be angry about it. She found that she couldn't sustain the anger once she looked at the actual logic of it, and that frustrated her more than the surveillance itself, the way he made it difficult to argue with him by being right. "Who is Reeves?" she said. "A man who moves information between people who don't want to talk to each other directly." "A broker." He paused. "He works for several parties. One of them is someone I've been in conflict with for about 8 months. So Brandon sold us out. Brandon sold out information about your location and your employment. He may not have understood what he was selling it to. That's generous. It's probably accurate, Luca said. He needed money and someone offered it. He didn't ask questions. Elena looked at the table, at the good wood of it, solid and real, at the coffee Luca had brought, at the quiet apartment that had felt like safety and was apparently neither fully one thing nor the other. What happens to Brandon? She said. Luca looked at her. I'm asking, she said. He'll be handled. That's not an answer. Elena, tell me what handled means. Her voice was level. She needed it to be level. I was married to him for 6 years. Tessa is his daughter biologically. I need to know what handled means. A long pause. Something working behind his eyes. He'll be discouraged, Luca said finally, financially and otherwise. He won't be in a position to cause problems. He won't be harmed. She held his gaze. Do you promise me that? Another pause, shorter this time. Yes. She exhaled. Okay. He left 2 hours later. Carver stayed. Elena worked through the afternoon with Carver's silent presence near the door, and she translated a long Italian shipping contract and answered emails and did not think about the phone call if she could avoid it, which she largely could not. Tessa came home at 4:15, took one look at Carver and said, Who's this? A colleague, Elena said. Tessa looked at Carver. Do you want some water or something? Carver blinked. Sure, he said. Thanks. Tessa got him a glass of water from the tap and went to her room, and Elena heard the low music start that meant her daughter was doing homework, and something in her chest eased very slightly. That evening, after Tessa was in bed, Elena sat at the kitchen table with the silence of the apartment around her, and she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She allowed herself to feel afraid, not the managed, controlled, functional fear she usually operated on. The fear you compress into something useful, the actual article. The cold, unstructured animal fear that lived underneath all the competence and the self-sufficiency. She was afraid because she was not in control of this. She was afraid because she had made a choice to step into something without fully knowing what it was, and the full shape of it was becoming visible now, and it was larger than she'd estimated. She was afraid because her daughter was asleep 20 feet away, and the situation surrounding them had threads she couldn't see or follow. She let herself feel all of it for about 10 minutes. Then she put it away and went to bed. She dreamed about the park, the rain and the running, and the man in the shadows stepping into the light. In the dream, she tried to see his face before he turned away, and she could never quite manage it. She woke at 6 feeling oddly resolved. The next 4 days were quiet in a way that didn't feel like safety so much as held breath. Carver was there in the mornings and evenings, a different man during the day, younger, quieter, who sat in the lobby and never came upstairs. Luca called twice, brief and businesslike, updating her on nothing specific and implying progress she had no way of measuring. On the 5th day, Elena went to the office. She told Luca she was coming and he didn't argue, which told her something about how the situation had shifted. The building on the 14th floor felt exactly the same as it always had. The same staff, the same paper and coffee smell, the same efficient hum of a working business. But Elena felt herself moving through it differently. She looked at the people she'd been working alongside for 2 months and she wondered, not for the first time, what they knew about what they were part of, how much they chose to see. She was working through a dense German regulatory document at her desk when Luca appeared in her doorway, which had become, over these weeks, a familiar enough sight that she'd started to simply look up and wait without tensing. He was not alone. The man with him was roughly Luca's age, built differently, leaner, with the angular face of someone permanently running on not enough sleep, and eyes that moved around the room before his attention settled anywhere. He wore a suit that was expensive but not quite right, like he'd bought it for a different version of himself. "Elena," Luca said. "This is Marco. He works with me on the operational side." Marco looked at her. Not the assessing look she'd anticipated, something more careful than that. Measuring, but not in the way of a threat. More like a man trying to determine if someone was ready to hear something. "Ms. Voss," Marco said. His accent was New York layered over something European, Italian maybe. Lucas told me about you. Should that concern me? Elena said. Something flickered at the corner of Marco's mouth. Probably not. Lucas shut the office door. He sat on the edge of the desk across from her, and Marco stood, and Elena looked at both of them and understood that whatever this was, it was not routine. The woman who called you, Lucas said. We identified her. Elena waited. Her name is Diana Vale. She's an operative, her word for it, who works for a man named Karsten Holt. Holt runs a competing network in the Northeast. We've been in a cold war with him for the better part of a year. He paused. Vale calling you was a test. A test of what? Of how you'd react. Whether you'd run. Whether you'd go to someone outside my network. Whether you could be flipped. Elena processed this. She called me to see if I'd call the police. Or a journalist. Or someone else who might have leverage over me. Marco this time. His voice was flat and professional. Holt's been trying to find a viable angle for months. You were visible and new, and we underestimated how quickly you'd appear on his radar. Underestimated, Elena repeated. That's a word for it. Luca looked at her steadily. I made an error in how I managed your exposure. I'm telling you that directly. She looked at him. There was something almost difficult about the way he said it. Not difficult as in reluctant, but difficult as in costly. Like honesty was a currency he had a limited supply of, and he was choosing to spend it. What does Holt want? She said. Leverage, control of certain routes, the usual anatomy of this kind of conflict. He paused. What he's found now is that you are a more direct route to pressure than he anticipated. Because you care what happens to us. The room was very quiet. Luca said, yes. It was a small word. It sat in the air between them, and Elena felt the weight of it in her sternum, the specific physical pressure of something true being said out loud. Marco was looking at a point on the wall with great professional interest. What does that mean for Tessa? Elena said. Her voice was steady. The steadiness cost her something. It means we need to make some decisions, Luca said, about how visible you are, about what we tell people, about... He stopped. He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. There are options I can put in place. Better security. A cover story for your employment history that makes you less useful as leverage. I can make it so that coming at you becomes more trouble than it's worth to Holt. Or, she said, because there was clearly an or you and Tessa leave. Clean. I can set up an account that covers living expenses for 2 years. You go somewhere quiet. This becomes someone else's problem. Elena looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment, and she thought about the bathroom window with the bullet hole in it, and the bar where Brandon had sat with his drink and his desperation. And she thought about what it had felt like before this, like the actual before, the daily weight of barely enough and never enough, and the radiator and the cracked ceiling and Tessa pretending not to be afraid. She thought about Tessa talking about MIT. She thought about this office and the work she was doing that was real and respected and worth something. She thought about the way Luca had said yes. I'm not leaving, she said. Marco let out a breath. She hadn't noticed he was holding it. Luca looked at her with something in his face that she couldn't fully read but felt a low current, very controlled, but there. You understand what you're choosing. I'm choosing what I was already in, Elena said. I just know more about it now. A long silence. All right, Luca said. Marco left 10 minutes later, pulling the door shut behind him with the careful quiet of someone who understood he'd been in the presence of something private. Elena and Luca sat in the office alone, and the afternoon light came through the windows and lay across the floor in long, pale rectangles. The candlelit dinner, Elena said. Was that also a test? Luca looked at her. What candlelit dinner? I'm being hypothetical. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. Nothing between us has been a test. She believed him. She was aware that she had been believing him repeatedly, and that each time she did, the foundation beneath her shifted slightly, and she was no longer standing in quite the same place she'd been before. Tell me something true, she said. About yourself, not the business. You. He looked at her for a long time. Outside, the city made its sounds. A car horn, wind against the glass. I had a family once, he said, before any of this. A different life. It ended. He paused. I decided afterward that the things you can control are the only things worth holding on to: power, structure, certainty. A pause. I was wrong, probably. I've been running on that for a long time. Elena looked at him, at the straight line of his jaw, the careful dark eyes, at the man underneath the architecture of the man. What ended it? She said. A choice I didn't make fast enough, he said. Someone got hurt who I should have protected. He stopped. Not evading. Stopping, like he'd walked to the edge of something and was choosing not to go further just yet. That's enough for now. Okay, Elena said. That's enough. They sat in the failing afternoon light and didn't say anything else for a while, and it was not uncomfortable, and Elena was aware that the silence between them was beginning to feel like something they inhabited together rather than something they endured separately. 3 days later, Brandon called. He called Tessa. Tessa was in her room, and Elena heard her voice through the door, heard it go from normal to flat, in the particular way it went flat when something required defense. She stood in the hallway outside and listened and made herself wait. Tessa was 15. Tessa had the right to handle it. 2 minutes. Then the door opened and Tessa stood there with her phone in her hand and her face very composed in the way that was always worse than her crying. He said he wants to meet, Tessa said. He said you're keeping me from him. I'm not keeping you from anyone. I know that. Tessa's jaw was set. I told him I'd think about it. Elena waited. I'm not going to meet him, Tessa said. I just didn't want to say no on the phone. It was easier to let him think I'd consider it. A pause. Is that bad? No, Elena said. That's smart. Tessa nodded once, sharp and decided. Then she went back into her room and closed the door, and Elena stood in the hallway and felt a specific, complicated grief, not for the marriage, which she'd finished grieving years ago, but for the thing Tessa had just had to become a little more of. Older. Defended. Careful. She called Luca. Brandon called Tessa directly, she said when he picked up. Silence. 1 second, 2. Where is he? Luca said. His voice had gone very quiet. I don't know. He called from a blocked number. I'll find him. Not a threat. A fact. Luca. She paused. What you promised me. I remember what I promised you. I need you to mean it. A beat. I mean it. She hung up and stood in the hallway, and the apartment was quiet around her, and she thought, this is the world I'm in now. This is what it looks like. There was a version of herself, the earlier version, the one with the cracked ceiling and the cold coffee and the $800 deadline, who would have been horrified by this calculation. But that version hadn't had Tessa hiding on a bathroom floor with glass all around her. You worked with what you had. 2 nights later, Luca came to the apartment. Not for business. He came with food, from a place she didn't know, carried in containers that smelled like garlic and something braised and complicated. And he set it on the kitchen table, and Tessa came out of her room and stopped, looking at Luca, and then at the food, and then back at Luca. Are you staying for dinner? Tessa said. Luca looked at Elena. A question. Yes, Elena said. Set the table. It was the first time the 3 of them had sat down together, and Elena was braced for the awkwardness of it. The 15-year-old and the man she didn't know, and the not yet named thing between her mother and this man who showed up at their door and made problems disappear. But Tessa had always been better at people than Elena was. She asked Luca questions, direct and curious but not impolite, where he grew up, what he thought of New York, if he'd traveled. Luca answered in the even, careful way he answered things, but without the professional distance. He asked her about school. She told him about the physics class she was taking, the teacher who actually knew what she was talking about. He said something about the mathematics of structural engineering that surprised Elena, specific and genuinely interested. And Tessa sat up slightly straighter. Elena watched it and felt something in her chest that she was not quite ready to name. After dinner, Tessa cleared the plates and disappeared back to her room, and Elena and Luca sat across from each other at the table with the remains of a meal between them and the quiet of the apartment around them. She's extraordinary, he said. I know, Elena said. He looked at her. The look lasted longer than it should have, and she didn't look away, and neither did he. This is getting complicated, Elena said. Yes, he said. I don't do complicated well. I don't believe that, he said. I think you do complicated better than almost anyone. I think what you don't do well is uncertainty. She opened her mouth, closed it. He was right, and she didn't particularly want to concede it, and she did anyway, silently, by not arguing. He left at 10. At the door he paused. That same pause, the same door frame, the same almost said thing, hovering at the edge of what he'd let himself become. She stood 3 feet away, and she looked at him, and the whole architecture of caution and control that she had built over 8 years of being alone was present and functional, and she was aware of exactly how easy it would be to let it remain. She said, "Whatever this is." He waited. "I'm not running from it," she said. Something moved across his face, real and unguarded and gone in a second, but she saw it. "Okay," he said. He left. Elena locked the door. She stood in the kitchen, and she listened to the city, and she thought about what she'd just said, and she decided she meant it, and she decided that meaning it was the beginning of something that was going to require more courage than she currently felt she had. Her phone lit up. Text message. Unknown number. 3 words. "You chose wrong." She stared at it. Then, a second message from the same number. This one was a photograph. She looked at the photograph for a long time without breathing. It was Tessa, taken today. She could see the jacket, the blue one she'd put on this morning, the one with the small tear at the left cuff, taken from a distance, from across the street from the school entrance. Tessa coming down the steps with her backpack, laughing at something, completely unaware. Someone had been 20 feet from her daughter today. Someone with a camera and a phone and a plan, and Tessa had not known, and Elena had not known, and all of the careful arrangements and the lobby guard and Carver at the door had not mattered because the exposure had already happened, and someone had been close enough to touch her. Elena's hand was not shaking. She was past the place where her hands shook. She was in the cold place, the deep cold, where everything went very simple and very clear. She called Luca. He picked up in one ring. "They photographed Tessa," she said. "Today, outside school. They just sent it to me." The silence on his end was 3 seconds. She could feel the quality of it. Not stillness, but pressure, like something held very tight. "I'm coming back," he said. "Yes," she said. "You are." She hung up. She walked to Tessa's door and knocked and opened it. Tessa was at her desk with headphones around her neck and a textbook open, and she looked up. Elena looked at her daughter, at the jacket still on the chair, the one with the tear at the cuff, at the ordinary, oblivious, unbearable normalcy of a 15-year-old doing homework. "I need you to listen to me," Elena said. "Something has happened, and I need you to not be scared, and I need you to do exactly what I tell you." Tessa took the headphones all the way off. She looked at her mother's face. "Okay," she said. Quiet. Steady. That borrowed steadiness that Elena had apparently been teaching her for years without knowing it. "We're going to be all right," Elena said. But even as she said it, she heard the thing under the words, the fracture line in the certainty, the place where she wasn't sure anymore, the place where the situation had just crossed from difficult into something she didn't have. Luca arrived in 11 minutes. Elena knew because she watched the clock. She stood at the apartment door with her phone in her hand and the photograph still on the screen, and she counted the minutes the way you count things when your mind needs something mechanical to hold on to. 11 minutes from her call to the sound of the elevator and his footsteps in the hall. She opened the door before he knocked. He came in and she handed him the phone without speaking. He looked at the photograph. His face did not change in any visible way, but something shifted underneath it. A tightening, very controlled, the way a structure responds to load. Carver was behind him, and Marco. And a woman Elena hadn't seen before, compact and sharp-eyed, who went immediately and without instruction to Tessa's room and knocked and went in. And Elena heard her daughter's voice, and then the woman's voice, low and steady. "Sit down," Luca said to Elena. "I don't want to sit down." "Elena," not a command. Something quieter than that. She sat. He sat across from her. He put her phone face down on the table. He looked at her with the full, undefended attention that she had come to understand was his version of honesty, the thing he gave instead of speeches. "This was vile," he said. "The woman who called me. Yes. This is an escalation. She's moving from information to demonstration." He paused. She wants you to know they can reach Tessa. She wants you scared enough to make a move. What move? To run, or to go to law enforcement. Either one creates problems for me. He looked at the table for a moment, then back at her. Or she wants you to pressure me, to make me reactive. Elena looked at him. Are you? Reactive? A pause. Not yet. What does not yet mean? He met her eyes. It means I'm still thinking clearly. I need to keep doing that. He paused. I need you to keep doing that too. She looked at him. She looked at this man who had come in 11 minutes and brought people and was sitting here managing a crisis with the same focused calm he brought to shipping contracts and regulatory filings, and she thought about what it had taken to build that, what it had cost, what kind of losses you had to absorb before stillness became your default. What happened to the family you told me about? She said. He went very still. Not now, she said. I'm not asking now. I'm asking later, but I'm asking. A long moment. Okay, he said. Marco appeared from the hallway. Carver's got a location on the number that sent the photo. Burner, but it pinged a tower on West 83rd 20 minutes ago. Betrayal, Luca said, consistent with her last known position. Don't move on it yet. Marco looked at him. Something passed between them. Not disagreement exactly, but a pressure. One man's urgency against another man's caution. Then Marco nodded and went back down the hall. The woman came out of Tessa's room. She's okay, she said to Elena. Shaken, but functional. She wants to talk to you. Elena went. Tessa was sitting on her bed with her knees pulled up, the textbook closed now, the headphones on the desk. She looked at Elena with those clear, measuring eyes and said, How bad is it? Manageable, Elena said. That's the word you use when you don't want to say bad. Elena sat on the edge of the bed. Someone took your photo today outside school. We don't know exactly who yet. The people Luca works with are finding out. Why? To scare me. Tessa was quiet for a moment. Did it work? Yes, Elena said. But being scared doesn't mean you stop functioning. Tessa looked at her for a long time. Are we leaving? No. Okay. Tessa said it with a finality that surprised Elena. No argument, no negotiation, just the flat acceptance of a decision she apparently trusted. Then, I don't want to go back to that other apartment. I want you to know that, whatever happens. I don't want to go back. We're not going back, Elena said. She meant the apartment. She wasn't entirely sure Tessa didn't mean something larger. She went back to the kitchen. Luca was on the phone, speaking Italian too fast for her to follow, clipped and precise. He ended the call when she appeared and looked at her. Tessa's okay, she said. He nodded. Something in him eased very slightly. I'm going to need to go handle this tonight, he said. I need you to stay here. Carver stays. Raina... He indicated the woman. Stays. Don't open the door. I know. He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he left. Elena sat in the kitchen with Raina, who turned out to be a woman of remarkable economy. She neither chattered to fill silence, nor performed alertness in a way that required acknowledgement. She simply existed in the space, and the space was somehow better for it. Elena made tea, she didn't drink, and looked at her laptop and didn't work. At 1 a.m, her phone rang. Not Luca. Marco. We have a problem, Marco said. His voice was wrong. Not wrong in the way of danger, wrong in the way of a man who had found something he didn't want to have found and hadn't yet decided what to do with it. What problem? Elena said. I need you to come to the office, tonight. It's 1 a.m. I know. A pause. Please don't tell Luca you're coming, not yet. She went cold. Marco, there's something you need to see, he said. Before he gets back, just come. She sat with the phone in her hand after he hung up, and she looked at Raina across the kitchen, who was watching her with the professional neutrality of someone who had heard one half of a conversation and was deciding whether it was her business. I need to go to the office, Elena said. Mr. Belladonna said, I know what he said. Elena stood. I'm going. You can come or you can stay with Tessa. Your choice. Raina looked at her for 3 seconds. Then she picked up her jacket. They took a car. The Meridian building at 1:15 in the morning was not empty. Elena had half expected it to be, but the lobby guard nodded at her without surprise, and the elevator opened on 14 to the sound of voices somewhere down the hall. The floor was maybe a third occupied with people who clearly worked irregular hours as a matter of course. Marco was in the conference room. He was alone, standing at the table with a laptop open in front of him, and he looked up when she came in, and the look on his face stopped her in the doorway. She'd seen that look before. Not on him, on other people. On people who were about to say something that couldn't be unsaid. "Sit down," he said. "You're the second person to say that to me tonight." "Elena." His voice was stripped of its usual sharp efficiency. Underneath it was something that might have been, on another man, apology. "Sit down, please." She sat. He turned the laptop toward her. It was a file. Documents, financial records, communications logs, a series of photographs. She looked at the first page and didn't understand what she was seeing. She looked at the second page and began to. The third page made her stop breathing. It was a contract. Or something structured like one. Not a legal document, but the kind of written agreement that exists in systems parallel to law. Names, terms, a date. The date was 6 weeks ago, 3 weeks before the bullet through the bathroom window. One of the names was Brandon Voss. The other name was Karsten Holt. She stared at the document. She read it twice. She read it a third time because the first 2 times her brain had refused to process the specific meaning of certain phrases, and she needed to be sure she was reading what she thought she was reading. Brandon hadn't sold information about her location after the bar meeting. That was what Luca had told her. Brandon had learned something and sold it, and that was the chain of events that had led to Holt's people appearing on their radar. That was not what this document said. This document said that Brandon Voss had been in contact with Holt's organization for 4 months, not after Luca's warning in the bar, before. Before Elena had called the number on the card, before any of it. The contact had been established while Elena was still in the Morningside Heights apartment, still freelancing, still running on 4 hours of sleep and cold coffee. And the information Brandon had provided wasn't her location or her employment. It was Luca's operation. Routes, timing, the names of 2 intermediaries. Information that could only have come from someone who had been inside that network. "How did Brandon have this?" Elena said. Her voice was not her voice. It was a version of her voice with all the warmth removed. Marco looked at her. He looked at the table. Marco. "Brandon Voss worked for Luca's organization for 8 months, Marco said. Before you. Before any of this. He was a courier, low level, but he moved things and he knew people and he learned more than someone in his position should have." He paused. "He was cut loose 14 months ago. Drinking, unreliable. He was paid out and removed." The silence in the room was enormous. "Luca knew who Brandon was," Elena said. Not a question. Marco didn't answer, which was also an answer. "When he found me in the park," Elena said. Her voice was entirely level now, the way voices go level when the person speaking them has gone to a place beyond the ordinary register of feeling. "He knew who I was." "I can't—" Marco stopped. "I don't know what he knew in the park. I genuinely don't know that. But when I called him, when I gave him my name..." Marco was quiet. "He recognized my name," Elena said. "Elena, did he recognize my name?" Marco looked at her. The professional mask had come entirely off now, and underneath it was a man who was exhausted and genuinely troubled and had made a decision tonight that he understood was going to cost him something significant. "Yes," Marco said. "He would have recognized your name." The room was very quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang and was answered. Elena looked at the document on the screen, at Brandon's name and Holt's name and the date that predated everything she thought she knew about how she had arrived here. She thought about the park, the rain, Tessa running, the way Luca had stepped out of the shadows with the certainty of a man who had already decided to be there. She thought about the card. Nothing on it but a phone number. "Come to me when you need me." She thought about the apartment and the job and 3 times what she'd been making and the secure building and the doorman and the lobby guard and all of it framed as generosity, as protection, as the organic consequence of a chance encounter in the rain. She thought about what else it could have been. What it could have been was a man with a reason to keep Brandon Voss's ex-wife close, to understand what she knew, to monitor what Brandon might have told her, to position her somewhere visible and controlled where she could be useful. She thought about Tessa on the bathroom floor with glass around her and whether that bullet had been random. She stood up so fast the chair scraped back. "The bullet," she said. "The bathroom window." Marco looked up sharply. "Was that random?" Her voice was shaking now. The level had broken. She could hear it, and she couldn't stop it. "The gang war, the stray bullet, was that real? Or was that—" "That was real," Marco said. He stood. He said it with a force that had no performance in it. "Elena, that was real. There is no version of this where Luca Belladonna put your daughter in danger intentionally. That is not who he is." "How do I know who he is?" she said. "How do I know anything about who he is?" Marco stood across the table from her, and he looked tired and honest, and he said, "Because I've worked with him for 9 years, and I've watched him make choices, and not all of them have been clean, and not all of them have been right, but there is a line, and he does not cross it. Not with a child. Not ever." She looked at him. She wanted to believe him. She was aware of wanting to believe him and was not sure whether that desire was information or just the last reflex of a woman who had already decided to trust someone and was desperate to keep that decision intact. "Why are you showing me this?" she said. "Because Holt knows about this document," Marco said. He sat back down. His voice went back to its efficient register, the mode of a man delivering a briefing. "Holt got to someone inside our organization, someone low, but positioned right. And they've taken a copy of this to a journalist, a specific journalist who has been building a story on Luca for 6 months. The story publishes in 4 days unless Holt gets what he wants." "What does he want?" "Luca to walk away from the East Side routes, which means walking away from 3 years of work and about 40% of the operation." He paused. "And Holt wants you gone. He thinks you're the—" He stopped. "Say it," Elena said. "He thinks you're the vulnerability," Marco said. "He thinks Luca will do things to protect you that he wouldn't do to protect anyone else. And he's using that. The photograph of Tessa, the phone calls, this—" He gestured at the document. "All of it is designed to force Luca into a panic move." Elena looked at the document again. "Does Luca know Holt has this?" she said. "Not yet." "Why not yet?" Marco looked at her directly. "Because I found it an hour ago, and I called you first." She stared at him. "Why?" "Because Luca will manage this the way he manages everything," Marco said. "He'll put himself between it and you, and he'll absorb whatever he has to absorb, and he won't tell you what it costs. And I think you deserve to know the full shape of what you're in the middle of before he decides what to show you." He paused. "I also think you're not going to run, and I think he needs someone in the room who isn't going to run." She stood there in the conference room at 1:40 in the morning, and she looked at this document that changed the geometry of everything she'd understood about the last 2 months, and she felt the full weight of it. Not just the fear. The other thing. The particular devastation of discovering that someone you have begun to trust may have had a reason, from the beginning, to want you close. It didn't mean Luca had used her. It didn't mean the thing growing between them was constructed. It didn't prove manipulation. But it removed the innocence from it. The accidental beauty of 2 people finding each other in the rain. It put a history underneath the story she'd been telling herself, a history with Brandon's name in it, and Holt's name in it, and the specific ugliness of the world Luca actually inhabited underneath the legitimate businesses and the good coffee and the careful honesty. She picked up her phone. She called Luca. He answered in 1 ring. "I'm on my way back," he said. 20 minutes. "Come to the office," she said. "Conference room." A pause. "What's wrong?" 20 minutes, she said, and hung up. She sat down. Marco sat across from her, and he didn't say anything, and she didn't say anything, and the building hummed around them with the sound of a place that never fully slept. Raina appeared in his doorway. She looked at Elena. She looked at the laptop. She withdrew. Luca arrived in 17 minutes. Came through the conference room door, and he saw Marco first, then the laptop, then Elena. He looked at Elena's face, and she watched something in his change. The composed, directed certainty going somewhere else, replaced by something that was almost like fear. He looked at the document on the screen. He looked at Marco. "How long have you had this?" he said. 2 hours, Marco said. "Why didn't you call me first?" "I called Elena first," Marco said. Luca looked at him for a long moment with the specific quality of a man who was angry and was choosing not to be angry right now because there were things that mattered more. Then he looked at Elena. She looked back at him. She looked at his face, the face she'd been learning for 2 months, the architecture of control and the things that moved underneath it. And she said, "How long have you known who I was?" The room was very quiet. "Elena, how long?" He looked at her. He didn't look away. He didn't perform regret or calculate angle. He just looked at her with that full, unguarded attention, and she knew before he spoke that he was going to tell her the truth, and she didn't know yet if the truth was something she could live with. "I knew your name when you called me," he said. "I didn't know you were going to call. I didn't arrange what happened in that park. I was there by chance. That part is true. Tessa ran past me and I saw what was behind her and I acted. That is the complete truth of that night." He paused. "But when you told me your name..." "Yes, I knew who you were. You knew I was Brandon's ex-wife." "Yes." "You knew he'd worked for you." "Yes," she breathed. "And you hired me anyway. You moved us into that apartment anyway, and you didn't tell me." "No," he said. "I didn't tell you." "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because by the time you called me, you needed help, and I could give it. And because Brandon was already talking to Holt, and I needed to understand what he'd given them, and having you close helped me understand that." A pause. "And because from the moment I heard your voice on the phone, I wanted you to trust me, and I knew if I told you the truth, then you wouldn't." Elena looked at him. She looked at this man who had told her the truth when she asked for it. And the truth was that he had told her the truth in order to be trusted, which was honest and also a specific kind of manipulation, and she did not know how to hold both of those things in the same hand. "Did you know about the bullet?" she said. "No." Immediate. No calculation. "Could it have been connected to Holt using Brandon?" "The gang conflict on your block was real and unrelated to any of this. I have looked at it from every angle. I would rather it had been my doing. At least then I could have prevented it. It was random. Tessa was..." His voice did something, just slightly. "Tessa was nearly hurt by something I had no part in and could not have anticipated." She looked at him. She thought about the 11 minutes, the coffee on Lexington, the dinner he'd brought, Tessa talking about MIT and him saying she should go to MIT, with that hollow note underneath it that she'd heard and not understood. She thought about what Marco had said. 9 years. A line he doesn't cross. She thought about being alone in Morningside Heights, with a cracked ceiling and a child who flinched at loud sounds, and a radiator that was giving up. None of that erased what he'd withheld. None of it rewrote the calculation he'd made. But she was a woman who had spent 8 years making hard calculations of her own, who had measured survival against pride and chosen survival every time and refused to apologize for it. And she understood, in the cold and furious clarity of this moment, that the calculation he had made was not entirely different from the one she had made. That understanding didn't mean she forgave it. It meant she had to decide what came next without the insulation of pure moral clarity. "Holt publishes in 4 days," she said. Luca looked at her. Something changed in his face. Not relief, but attention. The attention of a man who has been told the sentence he was waiting for. "Yes," he said. "What does it say?" "The story." "Enough," he said. "Enough to shut down the legitimate businesses. Enough to make my position in this city untenable. And enough to tie you to all of it by proximity." She absorbed this. Tessa. Tessa's name isn't in it, but yours is. She sat with that. "What do you need?" she said. He looked at her like he wasn't entirely sure what she was asking. "To stop it," she said. "What do you need?" Marco made a small sound across the table that might have been relief and might have been something else entirely. Luca looked at Elena, at her face, at the set of her jaw, at the anger still visible in her eyes and the decision visible underneath the anger. And he said, "I need access to Vale. I need someone Holt doesn't know, someone outside my usual people, to get close to her and find out who the journalist is before Marco's contact inside that story goes dark." "Outside your usual people," Elena repeated. "Yes." She looked at him. She understood what he wasn't saying because she had gotten very good at reading the space around his words. "You're asking me," she said. "I'm not asking you anything," he said. "I'm telling you what I need. What you do with that is yours." She stood up. She walked to the window. The city below was still alive. Cars, the occasional figure on the sidewalk, the lit windows of buildings where other people were moving through their own parallel crises. She looked at it, and she thought about Tessa asleep in the apartment upstairs, or trying to be asleep, with Raina at the door and Carver in the lobby, and the whole careful scaffolding of protection that had turned out to have been constructed on a foundation that included Brandon's name and a buried history she hadn't been shown. She thought about this woman she'd been in Morningside Heights. What that woman would say about this moment, about this choice. That woman would say, "You run. You take Tessa and you go to Cleveland and you let the whole burning machinery of this man's life consume itself without you in it." And that woman had been cold and tired and mostly alone, and her daughter had been on a bathroom floor with glass around her. Elena turned from the window. She looked at Luca. "Tell me about Vael," she said. "Everything you know. Start." Luca talked for 40 minutes. Elena stood at the window for the first 10 and then came back to the table and sat down. And she listened the way she listened to complex documents and languages that required full attention. Not waiting for the parts she already understood, but tracking the parts she didn't, building the architecture of it piece by piece until the whole structure was visible. Diana Vail, 43 years old, former corporate intelligence, the kind of work that existed in the legal gray between consulting and espionage. She had worked for 3 different private firms before Holt, and her value was not violence, but access. She was a woman who could be in rooms, who could be present without alarming anyone, who moved through professional environments with the credentialed ease of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere. She had been seen twice in the last week, once near the Meridian building, once near Tessa's school. She spoke German and French. Elena looked at Luca when he said that. "There's a trade conference," Luca said, "day after tomorrow. European import and export, mid-size firms. Meridian has a registered presence. We do every year. Vael has been attending under a consulting cover for the last 3 years. It's how she builds contacts, how she moves information without traceable communication. And you think she'll be there?" "I know she'll be there. Marco confirmed it an hour ago." Elena looked at the table. She thought about Vael's voice on the phone, the flat Midwest calm, the professional delivery. She thought about her own voice, the version she used in conference rooms and client calls, the version that was competent and neutral and gave nothing away. "I speak her languages," Elena said. "Yes. I'm not one of your people. Holt doesn't have a file on me the way he has files on your network." "No." "You want me to get close to her at the conference and find out who the journalist is?" "I want you to consider it," Luca said. "I want you to know that if you say no, I will find another way, and it will take longer, and there is a real probability that longer is too long." He paused. "And I want you to know that if anything goes wrong, I will have people in that room." "People she knows," Elena said. "People she'll recognize." "Yes," he said, quietly. She looked at him. She looked at the document still on the laptop screen with Brandon's name on it, and she thought about the chain of things. The chain that had started in a park in the rain and had led here, to this conference room at 2 a.m. with the city burning quietly outside. "There's something you need to say to me," she said. He looked at her. "About why you didn't tell me. Not the tactical reason. The actual reason." Luca was quiet for a long time. Marco had left the room 20 minutes ago on some pretext that fooled no one. The conference room was just the 2 of them and the city outside. "Because I was ashamed of it," Luca said. "The calculation I made. I told myself it was protection and it was also surveillance, and I knew the difference, and I did it anyway." He looked at the table. "And then it stopped being a calculation. And by the time it stopped being a calculation, it was too late to tell you cleanly. Everything I said after a certain point was true. I need you to know that. But it was built on a foundation I'd hidden, and I knew that, and I kept knowing it." Elena looked at him. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I know what I did." "Good," she said, "because I'm not giving it yet." She stood up. "I'll do the conference. Tell me everything about Vael. Everything. What she drinks, how she stands, what she responds to." Something in Luca's face moved. Not relief. something older and more complicated than relief. "Thank you," he said. "Don't," Elena said. "I'm not doing it for you." She was doing it for Tessa. She was doing it because her name was in a journalist's draft, and she was not going to let someone else's war write the story of her life. She was doing it because she was tired in the bone-deep way of someone who has been surviving for so long that the idea of actually fighting back felt like oxygen after years of rationed air. She went home at 3. She slept 4 hours. She woke and she made coffee and she sat at the kitchen table and she read everything Marco had sent to her phone about Vial. The professional history, the conference registrations, the behavioral profile assembled from Luca's people who had watched her over 8 months. Tessa came out at 7. She looked at her mother's face and sat down across from her and said, "What are you doing?" "Reading." "Mom." Elena looked up. "I heard you come in at 3, Tessa said. "I heard you on the phone at 5. I know something is happening." She paused. "I'm 15, not 5. You can tell me." Elena looked at her daughter, at the clear, patient, infuriating maturity of her. "I have to go somewhere tomorrow," Elena said. "A conference. I'm going to talk to someone there and find out some information that will help close this situation." Tessa was quiet. "Is it dangerous?" "No," Elena said. And then because Tessa would know, "Probably not." Tessa nodded slowly. "Will Luca be there?" "Nearby." Another nod. Then, "Do you trust him?" Elena looked at her coffee. She thought about the honest answer, about all the architecture of the honest answer. The document with Brandon's name, the withheld history, the 11 minutes, the coffee from Lexington, the way he'd said yes when she asked if he cared what happened to them. "With your safety," Elena said. "Yes." Tessa seemed to hear everything that wasn't said around those words. She nodded once more, the same sharp, decided nod. "Okay," she said, and went to make herself breakfast. The conference was held in a hotel in Midtown, the kind of mid-tier hotel that hosted 100 events a year, interchangeable carpeted ballrooms and round tables and registration desks with lanyards. Elena arrived at 9:15 in a charcoal blazer and heels she could actually move in, her hair up, her conference badge reading Meridian International Trade in clean black letters. She scanned the registration list the night before. She knew Vail's cover, D. Vail, Strategic Consulting. She knew the panel Vail was scheduled to moderate at 11. She knew the coffee station Vial had been observed using at every conference she'd attended for 3 years. She got coffee. She waited. At 9:47, Diana Vail walked in. She was smaller than Elena had expected, not slight, compact, the way some women are compact, with the posture of someone who had trained herself to take up precisely the space she chose and no more. She wore gray, close-fitted, professional. Her hair was brown and cut efficiently. She looked like 43 versions of the same woman you'd seen at 43 different industry events, and that was the point. That was the entire craft of it. She went to the coffee station. Elena moved. "The line's deceptive," Elena said, appearing beside her. "The urn on the left is actually the good one. They never label it." Vail looked at her. The assessment was brief and practiced and visible only if you were looking for it. Elena smiled in the neutral, professional way of someone making small talk at a conference, because that was what you did. "Good to know," Vail said. Her voice was exactly as Elena remembered it. Flat, controlled, the voice of someone who had decided very early that tone was a resource and wasted none of it. "First time at this one?" Elena said. "3rd year," Vail said. "You?" "4." Elena extended her hand. "Elena Voss. Meridian." A fraction of a second, the name registered. Elena watched it register, watched the almost imperceptible shift in Vail's eyes, the recalibration. "Dana Vail," Vail said. She shook Elena's hand. Her grip was firm and brief. They stood at the coffee station and Elena talked about the conference, about the panel on European customs regulation, about a contact in Frankfurt she'd been working with on a shipment delay. She talked fluently and specifically and without any visible agenda, and she watched Vial decide in real time how to handle this. Whether Elena Voss appearing at her coffee station was coincidence or operation. Vail decided coincidence. Elena could see the decision. It was the wrong one. "Are you on any of the afternoon panels?" Elena said. "Moderating the 11 o'clock. Vial said. The customs one? I'll be there. Elena picked up her coffee. Good to meet you, Dana. She walked away. She didn't look back. She found a seat in the main hall, and she sat and she breathed, and her hands were completely steady, and her heart was doing something that had nothing to do with calm. Her earpiece, small, fitted, invisible at this angle, carried Marco's voice. Good. She watched you walk away. She made a call on her cell immediately. Can't intercept it yet. Elena said nothing. The microphone was the pin on her lapel. Luca says hold the current approach. Don't push. She held it. The 11 o'clock panel was on customs compliance in cross-border pharmaceutical trade. Elena sat in the third row and watched Vial work. And she was good. That was the honest fact of it. She ran the panel with the same flat efficiency she brought to everything, keeping speakers on time, asking questions that sounded open, but directed the conversation exactly where she wanted it. During the coffee break after, Vial found Elena. That was the tell. Vial came to her, set her coffee down at the same high-top table where Elena was standing, positioned herself with the small, deliberate movement of someone choosing their angle. Meridian, Vial said. You work closely with Belladonna? Elena looked at her. She let the name land. She didn't flinch, and she didn't perform not flinching, which was harder. He runs the company, Elena said. I run the translation and documentation side. We interact professionally. Just professionally? Elena looked at her with the mild, slightly offended expression of someone who found the question presumptuous. That's an interesting follow-up to a business introduction. Vial smiled. It didn't reach anything. Sorry, industry gossip. You know how it is. She paused. I've heard some things about Meridian recently. Due diligence stuff. I hope it doesn't create complications for you. What kind of things? Elena said. Nothing specific, Vial said. Just when you work for someone, it's worth knowing who you're working for. Elena looked at her steadily. She thought about Tessa's jacket with the tear at the cuff. She thought about the photograph taken from across the street. She thought about this woman's voice saying you chose wrong and the cold administrative certainty of it. I know who I work for, Elena said. Vial looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in the gray eyes, a recalculation. She was deciding something. Elena could feel it the way you feel weather changing. There's going to be some information becoming public, Vial said, in the next few days, about Meridian, about Belladonna's other activities. She set down her coffee. I'm telling you this as a professional courtesy. Not everyone who works for someone like that knows what they've gotten into. Sometimes people are positioned without their knowledge. Elena let silence sit for 2 seconds. Then, that's very considerate of you. I mean it. I'm sure you do. Elena picked up her bag. What publication? Vial's eyes sharpened. I'm sorry? The story you're describing. What publication is it running in? If it's going to affect my employer, I should know where to look. A pause. Longer than it should have been. Vial was deciding how much she'd already given away. I don't have that information, Vial said. You know exactly what publication, Elena said. Her voice dropped. Not threatening, certain. The voice of someone who has stopped performing the scene they were in and stepped into the one underneath it. You put it there. You've been building it for 6 months. You and Holt. The name. Vial went very still. I'm not here by accident, Elena said, and you know that now. But you came to me anyway, which means you want something. So tell me what it is and stop wasting both our time. A long moment. Then Vial said quietly, You're braver than I expected. I'm more tired than brave, Elena said. What does Holt want? You know what he wants. I want to hear you say it. Vial looked at her. He wants Belladonna out. Not harmed. Out. Walk away from the East Side operation, sign over the Rotterdam contract, and the story doesn't run. She paused. Simple. And my name disappears from the story. Yes. And Tessa, your daughter was never going to be in the story, Vial said. Something in her voice shifted slightly. Not softness. A boundary. That's not what this is. The photograph, Elena said. A demonstration. That we were serious. Nothing more. She paused. I regret it was necessary. Elena looked at her. She believed the regret. She didn't believe it changed anything. I need 24 hours, Elena said. Vial looked at her. You don't have authority to negotiate this. No, Elena said, but I have his ear. And I think you know that or you wouldn't have come to this table. She held Vial's gaze. 24 hours. I'll get you an answer. A long silence. The conference noise moved around them. Voices, someone laughing nearby, the dull percussion of 100 professional conversations. 24 hours, Vial said. After that, the story goes to the editor. She picked up her coffee and walked away. Elena stood at the high-top table and she breathed, and in her earpiece, Marco said, We got it. She called the journalist from this building twice in the last 3 months. We have the number. We're running it. Elena said nothing. Luca wants you to leave now. Side exit. There's a car. She walked to the side exit. The car was there, black, engine running, Carver at the wheel. She got in and the door closed and the city moved past the windows and she sat in the back seat and she let her hand shake finally because no one was watching. The number Marco traced belonged to a journalist named Claire Astor, the New York Register. Elena knew the byline. She'd read her work. Astor was good, careful, thorough, the kind of journalist who didn't run things until they were airtight, which meant the story was airtight. They were in Luca's office by 1 in the afternoon. Luca, Elena, Marco, and a lawyer named Shiv, who apparently existed in the margins of Luca's legitimate world and had the look of someone who had made peace long ago with the moral complexity of her client list. Luca listened to Elena's full account without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. She offered terms, he said. Yes. Walk away from the east side, sign over Rotterdam. Yes. And your name is cleared. And my name is cleared, Elena said. I want that noted. I'm not telling you to take it or not take it. I'm telling you what she said. Luca looked at Marco. Marco looked at the table. Rotterdam is 3 years of work, Marco said. The east side routes are 40%. Well, I know what they are, Luca said. Flat, final. He looked at Elena. She said 24 hours. Yes, he nodded. He stood and went to the window. Elena watched his back and the straight line of it, the stillness that was currently, she understood, doing an enormous amount of structural work. There's something else, Marco said. He looked at Elena. She looked at him. He said, The journalist, Astor. We can stop the story. We have the number. We have the contact chain. We can intercept. Elena looked at him. What does intercept mean? Discredit the source material, Marco said. Make the documents look fabricated. Astor is thorough. If we introduce doubt, she won't run it. She'll pull it back and spend 2 months re-verifying, and by then the window is closed. Elena looked at Luca's back. Is that what you're going to do? He turned from the window. He looked at her with the full, complicated weight of his attention, and he said, That depends. On what? On whether you think it's the wrong thing to do. She stared at him. You're asking me. Yes. The room was very quiet. Elena thought about it. She thought about it honestly, not from the safe position of someone who didn't have skin in the game, but from inside the situation, where her name was in a draft and her daughter had been photographed, and the last 2 months of her life sat on the table between all of them. She thought about Claire Astor, who was probably good and thorough and believed she was doing something right. She thought about what the documents actually contained. The documents are real, Elena said. Yes, Luca said. Then discrediting them is a lie, she said. Yes. And you're asking me if you should tell that lie. I'm asking if you can live with the answer, he said. Either way. She looked at him. She thought about Tessa talking about MIT. She thought about the version of herself that had sat in Cleveland summers ago and told her mother she was not going back to that city with that man, that she was going to make something that was hers, even if it cost everything. She was in the middle of making it. It was costing everything. There's a third option, she said. Luca waited. I talked to Astor directly, Elena said, not as Belladonna's employee, as myself. I tell her that the story is framed as missing context, that the source, Holt, has his own agenda, that if she runs it, she's being used. She paused. Journalists don't like being used. Marco said, That's risky, Elena said. Yes. I know. If she runs it anyway, then she runs it, Elena said. And we deal with that. But we deal with it without lying about documents that are real. She looked at Luca. That's where I am. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, make the call. She called Astor from the conference room with Luca beside her and Marco outside the glass door and the city bright and cold beyond the windows. Astor picked up on the third ring. Professional, brisk, not hostile. Elena said, my name is Elena Voss. I work for Meridian International Trade. I think you're working on a story about my employer, and I think you're about to be played. Silence. Then, Ms. Voss, how did you get this number? The same way you got your documents, Elena said. Someone wanted me to have it. A pause. I don't discuss active. Karsten Holt built your source, Elena said. The documents are real, but the framing is his. He's in a conflict with Meridian over business territory, and you are the weapon he built to end it. She paused. You're a good journalist. I've read your work for 3 years. I'm asking you to look at who benefits from this story running right now, and ask yourself if that's why it's running. Silence on the line. A long silence. I'd want to speak to you on record, Astor said. I know, Elena said. That puts you in a difficult position. Yes, Elena said. Why are you willing to do that? Elena looked at the table, at her hands, steady now, at the city in the window, at Luca's reflection in the glass, him watching her, his face unguarded for once, open in the way of something that didn't have a name yet. Because my name is in your draft, Elena said, and I'm not going to let someone else's war write the story of my life. Silence. Then Astor said, I'll call you back in 2 hours. Elena hung up. The 2 hours were the longest she'd experienced since the bathroom floor with the broken glass. Marco paced. Carver sat immovable near the door. Luca didn't pace. He sat very still, with his hands flat on the table, and Elena sat across from him, and they didn't talk about what happened next because there was nothing useful to say about what happened next. At the 90-minute mark, Marco's phone rang. He answered it, and his face did something, and he looked at Luca and said, Holt's people are moving. They know about the conference. They know about Astor. He paused. They know Elena made the call. Luca stood. How many? He said. 2 cars. They're 20 minutes out from this building. Luca looked at Elena. Something in his eyes had gone to a place she hadn't seen. Not the cold professional authority, not the controlled manager of crises. Something older and rawer, the face of a man who has already lost something once and is looking at the specific possibility of losing it again. You need to leave this building, he said. Where? Now, he said. Marco. Tessa, Elena said. Luca was already moving. Reina is with her. I called her the moment Astor picked up. He stopped in front of Elena and he looked at her, and for one fractured second, everything they hadn't said out loud was entirely visible between them. The full weight of it, the history, and the anger, and the thing growing underneath all of it that neither of them had named. I need you to trust me. One more time. I need you to go with Marco and not argue. What are you going to do? She said. Finish it, he said. Luca, Elena. He put his hands on her face, just briefly, just for a moment, and the touch was so entirely different from anything she'd been braced for, so quiet and specific and real, that she stopped breathing, his eyes on hers. I know what I owe you. I know what I did, and what it cost, and I know what I have to do to be the person who deserves to be in the same room as you. He dropped his hands, stepped back. Let me do it. Marco's hand was on her arm, gentle and firm, already moving her toward the door. She looked at Luca's face. Then she moved. The elevator was fast. The lobby was Carver and another man she didn't know, and a car at the curb with the engine running. Marco put her in the back and got in beside her, and the car moved, and Elena looked back through the rear window at the building they'd come from. Her phone rang. Astor. She answered. Ms. Voss, Astor said. I've been going back through my source chain. I want to ask you some specific questions about the Rotterdam contract. A pause. But first, are you somewhere safe right now? Elena looked out the car window at the city moving past. I'm working on it, she said. Her phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. She looked at it. It was Vile. 3 words. Holt changed the plan, and then a second message, arriving before Elena could process the first, that made the car feel very small and very cold, and made Marco look at her face and say, the second message from Vael said, "They have the girl." Elena read it twice. The words didn't change. Marco saw her face and grabbed her phone and read it, and said something sharp in Italian, and immediately had his own phone out, calling. Elena sat in the moving car and she felt the world reorganize itself around those 4 words, the way the world had reorganized around a bullet hole in a bathroom wall. Everything that had seemed solid revealed as provisional. Everything she'd been holding revealed as held by something thinner than she'd known. "Reina," Marco said into his phone. Then, "Reina." Then his jaw tightened and he pulled the phone from his ear and looked at it and called another number. "Marco," Elena said. "Working on it." "Marco." Her voice was flat and absolute. "Tell me what's happening." He looked at her. "Reina's not picking up." The car stopped at a light, and Elena had the door open before Marco's hand reached her arm, and she was out of the car and moving before she'd made the decision to move, just her body, operating on the animal logic of a mother who had heard 4 words and was done sitting in cars. Marco caught her at the sidewalk. Not roughly. He stepped in front of her and put both hands on her shoulders, and she tried to go around him and he held. And she was breathing in the way she hadn't breathed since the bathroom floor, ragged and uncontrolled. "Elena," his voice was firm and low, "if you run in any direction right now, you are in the open, and Holt's people are 20 minutes from that building. You are the other piece of this. You understand? They want Luca reactive, and they want you exposed. Don't give them either." She looked at him. She breathed. "Let me drive you to Tessa," he said. "Let me do that. Get back in the car." She got back in the car. Marco was on the phone the entire drive. 3 calls simultaneously, it seemed, moving between them, his voice dropping into a rapid Italian that Elena could follow only partially, catching words. Building, girl, Reina, Luca, now. The car moved through Midtown and then up, and Elena sat with her hands flat on her thighs and she counted blocks, and she thought about nothing except the next block and the one after that. Luca called it the 3rd block. She answered before it finished its first ring. "She's okay," he said immediately. "Tessa is okay. Listen to me. She's okay." Elena closed her eyes. 1 second. Then, "Where is she?" Still in the apartment. Reina's phone was taken. Someone got to the building's side entrance and disrupted communications in the stairwell. It was a technical move, not a physical one. Tessa was never touched. A pause. "Reina has a cut on her forearm. She's fine." "Vail said they have her." "Vail was told to say that," Luca said. "Holt needed you moving and panicked. He needed you in the open." A pause. "It almost worked." Elena opened her eyes. The city was still outside the window, indifferent and enormous. "Where are you?" she said. 20 seconds from Holt, he said. She heard something in his voice that she hadn't heard before. Not anger, not the controlled authority he wore like a coat. Something stripped down. The voice of a man who had made a final decision and was walking toward it. "Luca." She said his name and stopped. "I know," he said. "I'll call you." He hung up. The apartment building appeared at the end of the block. Marco had the car stopped before it fully halted, and Elena was out and through the lobby doors. The doorman standing, alert. A man she didn't recognize positioned near the elevator who nodded at Marco. And into the elevator and up. And when the doors opened on her floor, Reina was in the hallway with a white cloth wrapped around her left forearm and her face set in the tight expression of professional embarrassment at having been outmaneuvered. The apartment door was open. Elena went through it. Tessa was in the kitchen, sitting at the table with both hands around a glass of water, her jacket still on, her backpack on the floor beside her chair. She looked up when Elena came in, and something in her face broke open slightly. Just the edges of it, the controlled composure giving way for one moment, and Elena crossed the room and put her arms around her daughter, and Tessa pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, and neither of them said anything for a long time. The glass of water sat on the table and the city hummed outside, and Elena held her 15-year-old daughter, and she felt the full weight of the last 2 months move through her like weather. All of it, the fear and the anger and the compromised decisions, and the growing things she hadn't named, and the cost, the actual cost, of having chosen to stay. "I'm okay," Tessa said, into her shoulder. Mom, I'm okay. I know, Elena said. Raina got hit. I know. She didn't make a sound, Tessa said. When it happened, she just dealt with it. It was a pause. It was terrifying and also kind of incredible. Elena pulled back and looked at her daughter's face. At the clear eyes, the jaw that was set, because Tessa had learned somewhere along the way, from watching her mother probably, that you kept your jaw set when things happened that you hadn't chosen. She looked at her daughter's face and she thought, 8 years I have been making this person. 8 years of cold apartments and contract deadlines and late nights and hard choices. And look at what I made. Are we done? Tessa said. Elena looked at her. With all of it, Tessa said. Is this almost over? Yes, Elena said. She believed it when she said it. Luca found Holt at the office Holt maintained on the Upper West Side. A legitimate consulting firm, glass-fronted, staffed. The kind of operation that looked exactly like what it claimed to be because it was, partially, what it claimed to be. Holt was a man who had built his criminal infrastructure inside his legitimate one so thoroughly that you couldn't remove one without collapsing the other. It was smart. It was also, Luca had come to understand, his weakness, because it meant Holt could never go fully to war. He had too much visible to protect. Marco had given Luca the address 40 minutes ago. Luca went with 2 men, not Carver, not anyone Holt's people would have on a list. Clean faces. The building's security was good but not exceptional, and Luca had spent 8 months learning the shape of Holt's operation, and he walked through the lobby with the practiced ease of a man who had decided he belonged there and was waiting for the world to agree. Holt was on the 6th floor. He was alone when Luca came in. His staff had gone, or been sent, or understood instinctively that something was happening that they didn't want to witness. He was a man in his 50s, well-dressed, with the specific physical confidence of someone who had spent decades being the most powerful person in whatever room he was in. He was not the most powerful person in this room. He looked at Luca without standing. That was the tell. The decision to stay seated, to perform ease, because standing would have admitted that Luca's presence required a response. Belladonna, he said. Your people went to the apartment, Luca said. He closed the door behind him. He didn't sit. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, and he looked at Holt with the cold, patient attention he gave to things that were almost finished. The girl was never to be touched. That was known. No one touched her. Someone put hands on Raina 6 feet from where she was standing. Collateral, Holt said. Unavoidable. Luca looked at him. You're in my office, Holt said. I'm going to assume that means you're here to negotiate, not to do something we'll both regret. I'm here to end this, Luca said. One conversation. What it takes. Holt leaned back in his chair. He studied Luca with the assessing look of a man running numbers. The Rotterdam contract, he said, and the East Side distribution. Sign both over, in writing, with an effective date of the 1st of next month. The story doesn't run. Your Ms. Voss disappears from the draft. He paused. You keep your import businesses. You keep the European sourcing. You walk away clean. And Vale, Luca said. Reassigned, Holt said. She won't be in your city. And the journalist? Astor pulls the story. The source material goes cold. She's a professional. She'll move to the next thing. Luca was quiet for a moment. There's a piece of this you haven't considered, he said. Holt waited. Elena Voss spoke to Astor 2 hours ago, Luca said, on record. She provided context for the source material. She named you as the origin of the document chain. He paused. Astor is a good journalist. She's been building this story for 6 months. You just gave her a better story, the one where a criminal enterprise used a legitimate journalist to destroy a competitor. That story has a named source willing to go on record. He let that sit for a moment. Which means you need the story not to run considerably more than I do. The silence in the room changed quality. Holt's jaw moved. Something recalibrated behind his eyes. You're bluffing, Holt said. Call Astor, Luca said. Ask her. A long moment. Holt did not reach for his phone, which was itself an answer. The answer of a man who was afraid of what he'd hear. What do you want? Holt said. His voice had shed some of its performance. I want you out of New York, Luca said. Not the East Side. Not specific routes. The city. Your operation, your people, your infrastructure. 18 months to transition. After that, any presence you maintain here is considered an act of aggression, and I will respond to it accordingly. He paused. In exchange, I don't give Astor anything further. The story she has stays partial. It never becomes the story about you. You're asking me to walk away from 15 years. I'm offering you 15 more, Luca said. Somewhere else. Boston, Philadelphia, whatever city you want. I don't care. This one is mine. Holt looked at him. The look lasted a long time. It was the look of a man measuring something. Not the immediate calculus of the negotiation, but the longer arc of it. Where this went if he said no. What it cost if he said yes. He said, I want the transition in writing, legal framework. Shiv will have it to your lawyer tomorrow morning, Luca said. And Vale. Keep her, Luca said. She stays out of New York. Holt looked at him for one more long moment. Then he put his hands flat on the desk. A gesture that was, in its way, the equivalent of setting down a weapon. 18 months, Holt said. 18 months, Luca confirmed. He left. In the elevator down, one of the two men with him said nothing. The other said, very quietly, That was it? That was it, Luca said. You gave him the exit. Yes. Marco's going to say you should have... I know what Marco's going to say, Luca said. The elevator opened on the lobby. I didn't do it Marco's way. He called Elena from the car. She picked up immediately, and he told her. All of it, briefly and without ornament. Holt's agreement. Vale's reassignment. The 18 months. The story's effective death, not because it was suppressed, but because Astor, when Marco called her 20 minutes later to complete the context Elena had started, had the confirmation she needed that her source had an agenda, and good journalists didn't run stories that had been built as weapons by people who stood to profit from their publication. She would investigate Holt separately, in her own time, on her own terms. That was her choice, and it was the right one, and Luca had not tried to influence it further. On the phone, Elena was quiet for a moment after he finished. Then she said, Is it done? Yes, he said. She exhaled. He heard it. The long, slow release of breath that was 2 months of accumulated pressure finding its way out. Come here, she said. When you're done, come to the apartment. He came. It was evening by this time he arrived. The early dark of December. The city lit up in the way it got when the cold made the lights sharper and the air cleaner, and everything looked briefly like it meant something. He came up the elevator and Elena opened the door before he knocked, which had become, he realized, a pattern. Her on the other side of things before he reached them. She looked at his face. He looked at hers. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she stepped back and let him in. Tessa was at the kitchen table with her laptop and her physics textbook, and she looked up when Luca came in and she said, Is it over? Yes, Luca said. Tessa looked at him for a moment with those clear, measuring eyes. Then she looked at her mother. Then she said, Okay, and went back to her textbook. It was such a simple thing, such an ordinary 15-year-old homework at the kitchen table thing, that Luca stood in the hallway of the apartment for a moment and felt something move through him that he did not immediately have a name for. It was not relief, exactly. It was older than relief. It was the specific sensation of standing in a warm room after a very long time in the cold and not yet being sure your body remembered how to stop bracing. Elena made tea. She did it without asking if he wanted any, which was its own kind of statement. He sat at the kitchen table, not across from Tessa, but at the end, neutral territory. And he looked at his hands for a moment and then at the kitchen, at the ordinary functional evidence of a life that had been assembled under pressure and was still standing. Tessa went to her room at 9. She said goodnight to both of them, to Elena first and then to Luca. And the goodnight she gave him was not warm exactly, but it was direct. And from Tessa Voss at 15, Luca understood that direct was the higher form of the two. Elena and Luca sat at the table with their tea going cold, and the city quiet outside, and the apartment around them like a held breath. The family you lost, Elena said. He looked at her. You said you'd tell me, she said, when there was enough. Is there enough now? He looked at the table, at the grain of the wood, the small imperfection near the edge where something had been set down too hard once. He thought about how many times he'd answered this question in his own head, rehearsed the words, the sequence, the way to say it that made it something other than what it was. There was no way to make it something other than what it was. I had a wife, he said, and a son, 7 years ago. I was building the same kind of operation, different city, smaller, less organized, more volatile. Someone I'd made an enemy of decided the most efficient message was not to come for me. He stopped. He breathed. He came for them instead. Elena was very still. I was 20 minutes away, Luca said. I knew something was wrong. I had a call. I had information. And I made a calculation about timing, and I was wrong by 20 minutes. He paused. My son was 4. The apartment was completely quiet. I built everything after that on the idea that control was the answer, he said. That if you structured things correctly, if you removed enough variables, if you were careful enough and strong enough and far enough ahead, you could prevent it. You could build something that grief couldn't reach. He looked up at her. You can't. I know that now. But it took you and Tessa to show me I already knew it and had just been refusing to. Elena looked at him. She looked at this man who had carried a 4-year-old's absence for 7 years and built an empire on top of it and called the empire control and meant it as protection and was wrong about both. She looked at the face she'd been learning for 2 months, the architecture of it, the things it gave away and the things it kept. And she thought about the night in the park, the rain, the card with nothing on it but a number. She thought about what it meant to step out of shadows for a stranger's child when you had lost your own. What was his name? She said. Luca looked at her. Something crossed his face. The specific exposure of a person who has been asked the question that goes under all the other questions. Matteo, he said. She held his gaze. She let the name sit in the air between them, real and present, not rushed past. I'm sorry, she said. Not the reflexive version, the actual one. He nodded. Once. The nod of someone receiving something they had not been offered in a long time. They sat with it for a while. The tea cooled further. The city outside did its patient, indifferent work. I should have told you about Brandon from the beginning, he said. Yes, Elena said. I told myself it was protecting you. It was also protecting myself. Yes, she said again. I know the difference now. She looked at her hands. I've done the same thing. For 8 years, protecting myself and calling it protecting Tessa. Not always, but sometimes. He looked at her. We're both... She stopped. We've both been building fortresses and calling them homes, she said. That's what it is. That's what we've been doing. He was quiet for a moment. Is there a way out of that? I think you stop building and start letting things in, she said. I think it's terrifying, and I think you do it anyway. He looked at her with the full, unguarded attention he gave only to things that genuinely required it, and she looked back at him, and the moment lasted long enough to become something that would be difficult to walk back from. Neither of them walked back from it. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not a gesture, a fact. She turned her hand over. They stayed like that for a while. He left at 11. At the door he paused. That same door frame, that same pause, but different now. The almost said thing having been said, the weight of it distributed differently. The legitimate businesses, he said, I've been thinking about shifting more of my attention there. It won't happen overnight. And I'm not asking you to pretend the other part doesn't exist. I know what you are, Elena said. I said that to you once before. I mean it differently now. He looked at her. How differently? I mean, I know what you are, and I know what you're capable of, and I know what it costs you, she said. That's different from just knowing the category. He was quiet. I'm not asking you to become someone else, Elena said. I'm asking you to keep being honest with me, about everything, even the things you think I'd rather not know. That's harder, he said. Yes, she said. It is. He looked at her for a long moment, then he said, I can do that. I know you can, she said. He left. She locked the door and stood in the kitchen and listened to the apartment. Its good, solid quiet. The walls that held warmth, the refrigerator hum, the distant city. And she thought about the last 2 months. The chain of it. The accident and the card and the choice and the escalating cost of the choice and the thing that had grown, stubbornly and without permission, through all of it. She thought about who she had been at the beginning. That woman at the kitchen table at 11:40 at night with cold coffee and an overdue deadline and a ceiling crack she'd stopped looking at. That woman was still here. She hadn't been replaced. But something had been added to her. Some understanding, some capacity, some willingness to stand inside a difficult situation and hold her ground without pretending the difficulty wasn't real. She thought that was what they meant by becoming. Not transformation, just addition. Just the slow accumulation of what you'd survived and what you'd chosen and who'd been beside you while you did it. 3 weeks later, Claire Astor published a story. Not the story Holt had built, her own. A careful, sourced, meticulous piece about the way legitimate businesses were used as infrastructure for criminal networks on the Eastern Seaboard, using Holt's organization as its central case study. She'd spent 3 weeks re-verifying. She'd gone back to the document chain and followed it to its origin, which was Holt, and she'd built the story that was true rather than the story she'd been handed. Meridian International Trade was mentioned once, in a paragraph about legitimate import businesses that operated adjacent to criminal networks. Elena Voss was not mentioned at all. Elena read it on a Tuesday morning at the kitchen table with coffee that was hot for once, and Tessa eating cereal across from her, complaining about a physics problem set in the specific animated way she complained about things she actually enjoyed. She put her phone down. She looked at her daughter. "What?" Tessa said. "Nothing," Elena said. "Just looking." Tessa gave her the look. The 15-year-old, "You're being weird," mom look, with the small, involuntary smile underneath it that she was too old for but hadn't fully lost. Elena smiled back. 2 months after that, in February, Luca took her to his penthouse for the first time. It was high enough that the city below looked abstract, all grid and light and motion, the specific beautiful indifference of a place too large to notice any individual life moving through it. They stood at the window with glasses of wine. They were mostly not drinking, and the city spread out below them, and Elena thought, this is the view of a man who has spent years looking down at something from a safe distance. She thought, he is no longer entirely at a safe distance. Meridian, she said, the Rotterdam contract. Back in our hands, he said. Holt's people handed it over last week. And the transition? Moving, slower than I'd like, 16 months left. He looked at the city. There's a buyer for 2 of the East Side operations. Legitimate buyer. Marco thinks I'm losing my mind. Elena looked at him. Are you? He considered it. I'm making different calculations, he said, about what's worth holding on to. She looked at the city below, at all those lit windows. She thought about her mother in Cleveland, to whom she'd finally told something close to the truth, edited but honest, told her about the man and the situation and the complexity of it, and her mother had been quiet for a long time and then said, Is he good to you? And Elena had thought about it and said, He's trying to be. And her mother had said, That's the most you can ask of anyone. She thought about Brandon, who was in Philadelphia now, by all accounts, working some construction job, keeping his head down, occasionally texting Tessa short and inadequate messages that Tessa read and filed and did not respond to, in her own time, in her own way. She thought about Raina, who had come back to work the week after the stairwell with a narrow scar on her forearm, in a manner that suggested the whole episode had confirmed something she'd already believed about the world. She thought about Marco, who had bought her lunch 3 weeks ago under the guise of discussing a contract translation and had spent most of it not saying what she suspected he actually wanted to say, which was, I was right about you. She suspected he'd say it eventually. She thought about Matteo, about a 4-year-old she would never know and a 7-year absence that had built the man standing beside her. She thought about the cost of things, not as a ledger, not as debt to be settled, but as the simple factual accumulation of what a life contained, the losses and the choices and the things that grew anyway. I want to go back to school, she said. Luca looked at her. An advanced degree, she said. International law, maybe. Or trade policy. I've been thinking about it. She paused. I have time now. Actual time, which is... She stopped. I forgot what that felt like. Do it, he said. Immediately. No qualification. She looked at him. I mean it, he said. Whatever it requires. She looked at his face, at the dark eyes, the jaw, the controlled and complicated architecture of him. She looked at the place underneath all of it that she had only recently been permitted to see. The man who had stepped out of shadows because a child ran past him in the rain, who had carried a name for 7 years in the private country of his grief, who was learning, slowly, imperfectly, in the way of someone who has spent years being finished, how to remain unfinished. She thought, I don't know what this becomes. She thought, I know it's real. Tessa wants to meet with an MIT admissions counselor, Elena said. She found one who does sessions with high school juniors. She's a sophomore, Luca said. She's preparing, Elena said. She's been preparing since you told her she should go. She paused. She told me that. She said she started believing it when you said it like it was already true. Something moved across his face. The thing she'd seen that night in the office when she'd told him Tessa was talking about MIT. That hollow note, that old absence. But it was different now. Less hollow. Like a room that had been empty for a long time and had been, recently and carefully, begun to be filled. He didn't say anything. She reached out and put her hand on his arm, and he looked at her hand and then at her face, and the city went on below them, enormous and indifferent and lit in 10,000 windows. I forgive you, Elena said, for the thing you didn't tell me. I want you to know that. He was very still. Not because it was okay, she said, because I understand why you did it, and because I'm not carrying it anymore, and because... She stopped. Because whatever this is, I can't build it on top of something I'm still holding against you, so I'm letting it go. He looked at her for a long time. I don't deserve that yet, he said. No, she agreed. But I'm giving it to you anyway. You can earn it going forward. He exhaled. She heard it. The long, slow exhale of something released, some weight set down, the specific sound of a man who has been carrying something for so long that setting it down feels like a structural change. He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him. They stood at the window with the city below them and the cold pressing at the glass and the warmth of the penthouse at their backs. She thought about the park, the rain, the way darkness could organize itself into a shape before you knew what you were seeing. She thought, I saw him before I knew what I was looking at. She thought, I think I always will. In the morning, she would go home to Tessa. She would make coffee that was actually hot and sit at the kitchen table while her daughter complained about physics problems and planned her MIT preparation and grew, incrementally and stubbornly, into the version of herself that she was becoming. Elena would translate something, a contract, a deposition, words from one language into another, the patient work of making one world legible to another world that didn't have its vocabulary. She would think about law school applications. She would call her mother, and Luca would go to his office on the 14th floor and run his businesses and make his calculations, and in the space between them, begin the slow and imperfect and necessary work of becoming someone who did not need to hold everything at a safe distance in order to keep it. The city below did not care about any of this. The city had its own enormous life, its 10,000 griefs and 10,000 ordinary mornings, its accidents and its plans, its rain and its cold, and its particular brutal beauty. It had once, on a wet November night, put two people in the same dark park at the same desperate moment. Elena thought everything that matters started with accident, with Tessa running and a stranger in the shadows, and a card that had nothing on it but a number and the absolute necessity of making one phone call when you have run out of other options. She thought, I am glad I made the call. Below them, New York moved through its night, indifferent and alive, and the light from 10,000 windows held against the dark. And the storm that had started it all was months gone. And what remained? What was left when the fear and the anger and the cost of things had been accounted for and set down was this. A woman who had stopped surviving and started choosing. A man learning, for the first time in 7 years, how to stay. And between them, something that had no clean name yet, something still being built, imperfect and real and entirely theirs.